The first time I realized I might never get over Gabe Sullivan. I was sitting alone on my bedroom floor at 2:17 in the morning, listening to the hum of a refrigerator from a life that wasn't mine anymore. The sound came through my headphones thin and steady, followed by rain tapping against a window and the faint scrape of a chair across a kitchen floor. None of it should have mattered. They were ordinary sounds from an ordinary night almost a year earlier, preserved on one of the recordings Gabe used to make without telling me. Then his voice came from somewhere beyond the microphone. "Nate, you're going to burn that." A second later, I heard myself laugh. I pulled off the headphones so fast they landed beside me on the carpet. My apartment in Providence went silent again, except for the refrigerator in my own kitchen, making a slightly different hum from the one trapped inside that recording. I covered my face with both hands. I had promised myself I wouldn't do this anymore. No more waking up in the middle of the night and opening the folder on my phone labeled home. No more listening for the version of us that still existed inside those files. And yet there I was again, crying quietly in the dark and asking myself the same question I had asked on too many nights to count. When will I ever be able to forget you? The strange part was that forgetting Gabe should have been easier than this. At least, that was what people seemed to believe about breakups. Find the betrayal. Remember the cruel words. Focus on all the reasons you were better off apart. But Gabe had never cheated on me. He hadn't lied about loving me. There wasn't another man waiting somewhere in the background, and there wasn't some terrible secret I discovered after he left. Gabe was alive. As far as I knew, he was doing well. So was I, at least in every way a person could measure from the outside. By then, I had the work I wanted, a life in Providence that felt unmistakably mine, and mornings when I could honestly say I was happy. That was what made those nights so difficult to explain. Gabe and I hadn't separated because our love disappeared. When we said goodbye, I still loved him. He still loved me. For a long time, I thought that should have been enough to keep two people together. I know differently now. But to understand why, you have to go back more than 2 years, to a morning when Gabriel Sullivan was still just a stranger standing inside the stained glass restoration workshop near Providence's West End, wearing a faded olive field jacket and holding a recorder in his hand. I was leaning over my work table, guiding a glass cutter along a narrow section of blue glass, when he lifted one hand toward me and said, "Could you stop for 30 seconds? I looked up at him. "You came into a workshop and asked it to stop making noise?" Gabe smiled, and that was the first time I ever made him ruin a recording. For the next 30 seconds, I stood perfectly still while Gabe recorded the workshop around me. The old building had more sounds than I had ever noticed. The low ventilation fan, traffic beyond the windows, a delivery truck backing up somewhere down the block, even the faint ticking of cooling metal near my workbench. When Gabe lowered his recorder, I asked, "Did you get what you needed?" He glanced at the display. "I did until somebody made me laugh." Sounds like a professional problem. That earned another smile. Gabe was 32, 2 years older than me, and he carried himself with the relaxed confidence of someone accustomed to walking into unfamiliar places and figuring them out quickly. Over the next several days, while his documentary crew worked around the restoration project, I learned that unfamiliar places were normal for him. He had recorded interviews in fishing towns along the Maine coast, spent weeks with a production in Montana, and recently returned from an assignment in New Mexico. He did not talk about traveling as if it were glamorous. Airports were exhausting. Hotel coffee was usually terrible, and equipment cases never seemed lighter at the end of a long day. Still, whenever he described arriving somewhere new and putting on his headphones for the first time, something in him changed. I could hear how much he loved it. At the time, I found that quality attractive rather than important. My own life worked differently. I had spent years learning stained glass conservation, and I liked knowing where my tools belonged when I reached for them. Gabe noticed that, too. One afternoon, he watched me examine a cracked section from an old church window before asking why anyone would spend so many hours restoring something when new glass would be easier. "Because broken is not the same as worthless," I said. He became unusually quiet. That sounded rehearsed. It was not. "Good. Can you say it again?" "Absolutely not." He laughed and lowered the microphone. Our conversations became less about the documentary after that. During breaks, he asked what had drawn me to restoration. I asked how he had learned to hear differences between sounds I would have dismissed as background noise. He explained that recording was partly about knowing what to ignore, but mostly about recognizing what other people failed to notice. I told him that sounded suspiciously like my job. By the final day of filming, I knew how Gabe took his coffee and that he preferred driving several hours to flying when the schedule allowed it. He knew I hated throwing away usable scraps of colored glass, and that I stayed too late whenever I was close to solving a difficult repair. Then the production wrapped. Equipment cases disappeared, the extra voices vanished, and the workshop returned to its familiar rhythm. I assumed Gabe would become one of those people who passed briefly through my life and left behind a good memory. 3 days later, I was working at my bench when the front door opened. Gabe walked in wearing the same faded olive field jacket, carrying 2 coffees. There was no crew behind him, no equipment case, no professional reason for him to be there. "This time I am not recording anything," he said. I looked pointedly at the recorder visible in his jacket pocket. "Liar." He laughed, set 1 coffee beside me, and then seemed almost nervous for the first time since I had met him. "All right, you caught me, but I did not come here for sound." "Then why are you here?" Gabe met my eyes. "Dinner." I let him wait just long enough to make him wonder. Then I took the coffee and said, "Yes." That first dinner became a second one, then a Saturday morning coffee that somehow lasted until lunch, and before long Gabe stopped feeling like someone who had wandered into my workshop and started feeling like someone I expected to find in my life. We were different in ways that made being together easier rather than harder. I liked routines. Gabe liked discovering the diner 3 blocks farther away because he had never tried it. He convinced me to leave the workshop before sunset when I would normally have stayed another hour. I became the person who reminded him that coming home exhausted did not mean he owed me an entertaining story about wherever he had been. Sometimes he returned from an assignment, dropped his bag beside my apartment door, and simply sat with me in silence. I learned that those quiet 10 minutes meant more to him than questions. Months passed, and whenever Gabe traveled, Providence remained the place he returned to because I was there. Nearly a year after our first dinner, a storm knocked out the power in my apartment one evening. We sat at the kitchen table with a battery lantern between us while rain moved against the windows. Gabe placed his recorder on the table and switched it on. "What are you recording?" I asked. "Nothing." "Then why record it?" He leaned back and listened to the rain for a moment. "Because someday nothing might be the thing I miss." I told him that was embarrassingly sentimental. He told me I was only saying that because I liked it. A few weeks later, he came over after another assignment and handed me his headphones before I could ask what he was doing. "Just listen." The file was called home_01. First came the clean scrape of my glass cutter across a work table. Then my apartment door opening. Rain against the window. A pan settling onto the stove. Gabe complaining that I had used too much garlic, followed by my voice telling him there was no such thing. Then laughter. Mine first, his immediately after. Nothing dramatic happened in that recording. That was why it affected me so deeply. Gabe had taken the ordinary pieces of our life and treated them as if they were worth preserving. I removed the headphones and found him watching me. "You made all of that?" I asked. "We made all of that." There were a dozen clever things I could have said. Instead, I finally said the one that mattered. "I love you." Gabe did not hesitate or look away. He reached for my hand. "I love you too." Then he leaned in and kissed me, slowly and without hesitation, and I kissed him back. When we pulled apart, he kept his forehead against mine for a moment, smiling. After that, I stopped wondering whether I mattered to him as much as he mattered to me. I did, but there was something I did not understand yet. When Gabe called me home, he meant me. I had quietly begun to believe he meant Providence, too. Those were not necessarily the same thing. A few months later, he was packing for a 10-week documentary assignment when I leaned against the bedroom doorway and joked, "Just do not discover somewhere better." Gabe looked up from his bag. He smiled, but a beat later than usual. "I will come back to you," he said. I smiled and helped him close the suitcase. Back then, his answer felt like reassurance. By the time Gabe came home from that 10-week assignment, we had been together long enough that neither of us treated every reunion like an event. He left his boots by my apartment door, kissed me hello, and asked what was for dinner. I liked that. Our relationship had become part of ordinary life, which made what happened over the next year feel less like a sudden crisis and more like 2 roads slowly becoming visible beneath our feet. Mine appeared first. The owner of the restoration workshop had been my mentor for years, teaching me techniques no manual could explain and trusting me with increasingly complicated projects. One afternoon, after we finished reviewing a 19th century church window, he closed the project folder and told me he planned to retire. Then he asked whether I wanted to take over the workshop. I thought I had misunderstood him. I had spent nearly a decade learning that work, and ownership had always seemed like something far ahead of me. Suddenly, it was real. I called Gabe before I even left the building. He was happier for me than I knew how to be for myself. "Nate, that is incredible," he said. "You earned this." A few weeks later, his own opportunity arrived. The production company he had been working with was expanding one project into a longer series, and the producers wanted Gabe on the core field team. It meant more assignments, longer stretches away, and more time recording in places he had never been. When he told me, his voice carried the same excitement mine had when I told him about the workshop. I hugged him and said, "You have to do it." I meant it. That night we opened a bottle of champagne in my apartment and celebrated both opportunities. For a while, it felt almost perfect. Then Gabe looked at the two glasses on the table and asked, "So how does this work?" We both knew what he meant. Taking over the workshop would anchor more of my life in Providence. His new role would do the opposite. Still, neither of us treated that difference as a reason to panic. Gabe had traveled throughout our relationship and always returned. We talked through the practical version first. Gabe could still return to Providence between assignments, and I could visit when the workshop allowed it. Nothing about that sounded easy, but nothing sounded impossible either. "I do not want you turning this down because of me," I told him. I was about to say the same thing. "Then neither of us does." Gabe nodded. "Neither of us does." We decided that Providence would remain our shared base. Gabe would take the field assignments. I would begin the transition toward running the workshop, and we would adjust when reality gave us something concrete to adjust to. It was not denial. At that point, we genuinely had no evidence that our relationship could not accommodate both lives. I remember feeling relieved after we made the decision. We were not choosing between love and work. We were choosing both and accepting that doing so would require effort. Gabe raised his glass. "We try." I touched mine to his. "We try." And we did. For the next several months, we would prove something neither of us had been certain of that night. Distance itself was not enough to break us. What neither of us understood yet was that making the distance work would reveal a problem we had never thought to prepare for. At first, our plan worked so well that I wondered why we had worried. Gabe left for assignments. I buried myself in the growing responsibilities at the workshop, and we learned not to treat distance like an emergency. We called when our schedules allowed it. If he finished late, I did not sit awake wondering why he had not answered. If a restoration deadline kept me at the workshop, Gabe did not make me feel guilty for missing a call. When he had enough time between assignments, he came back to Providence. When my schedule allowed it, I went to him. There was no jealousy, no suspicion, no question about whether either of us still wanted the relationship. The distance was not breaking us. For 6 months, that seemed like proof that we had been right to try. What I did not notice at first was how much of our everyday lives was beginning to happen without the other person there. Every time Gabe returned, he would drop his equipment beside my apartment door, kiss me, and ask, "So what did I miss?" In the beginning, I could answer over dinner. Then the answers got longer. A client had changed the scope of a restoration. My mentor and I had met with an accountant about the ownership transition. I had begun handling estimates on my own. A supplier Gabe remembered had closed. I had started getting coffee with another conservator who worked 2 blocks away. None of those things were secrets. They were simply ordinary pieces of my life that had happened while Gabe was somewhere else. The same thing happened when I visited him. During one coastal assignment, I spent several days near the crew and realized everyone knew who I was before I had been introduced. "Good to finally have you out here," one of them told me. "Gabe talks about you all the time." I should have felt reassured. I did feel reassured. That was what made the realization so strange. They knew me through Gabe's stories, and I knew them through his. I watched Gabe move easily among people whose jokes I did not understand, discussing recordings I had never heard from places I had never seen. He was affectionate with me whenever he had a free moment. At dinner, he reached across the table for my hand as naturally as he always had. Nothing about him suggested I mattered less. But walking back to where he was staying that night, I understood that I had spent the day visiting a life that functioned perfectly well when I was not inside it. When I returned to Providence, Gabe came home 2 weeks later and encountered the same thing from the other direction. He stood in my workshop while I finished a conversation with a client whose project I had been managing for months. After she left, Gabe smiled and said, "You sounded like the owner." "Not yet. Close enough." He was proud of me. I could see it. Then he looked around at the schedules pinned beside my desk, the projects he did not recognize, and the names he had never heard me mention. "I missed a lot. I told you most of it." "You did." He smiled, but neither of us pretended that hearing about a life and being part of it were exactly the same thing. That night, lying beside him, I thought about how easily Gabe had moved through my workshop that afternoon and how much of the life inside it he no longer recognized. Then I remembered standing among his crew and feeling exactly the same way. Nothing between us had become colder. If anything, that made the change harder to name. I turned toward him in the dark, close enough to hear him breathing, and wondered how two people could still know each other so well while knowing less and less about the days happening around them. The next morning, I told Gabe what had been bothering me. He admitted he had been feeling it too, and neither of us wanted to surrender without finding out whether we could change it. We had already proved we could survive distance. So we stopped trying to solve the number of miles between us and started trying to become more present in the lives happening on either side of them. When Gabe had a longer break between assignments, he stayed in Providence instead of using part of it for another short trip. I brought him further into the life of the workshop. He met clients whose names he had heard for months, sat with me while I reviewed plans for the ownership transition, and came to dinner with people who had gradually become part of my routine. I loved having him there. Gabe seemed happy to be there too. But after a few weeks, I noticed something neither of us could fix by trying harder. Every morning, I went to the workshop and disappeared into 10 hours of decisions that mattered to me. Gabe worked on audio edits from my apartment, spoke with producers, organized equipment, and discussed whatever assignment might come next. At night, we came together again. We were loving. We were comfortable. But Gabe was not building a life in Providence. He was spending his time between assignments with me. Then we tried the opposite version. I arranged my schedule carefully and spent a longer stretch with Gabe on location, hoping that more than a brief visit might let me understand what sharing that part of his life could actually feel like. The first few evenings felt almost like a vacation. Then the ordinary days began. Gabe left early with the crew and sometimes worked 10 or 12 hours. I answered emails, reviewed estimates, and tried to handle workshop problems remotely until something inevitably required me to be physically present. Gabe was not neglecting me. I was not resentful of his work. That was the point. I simply began to recognize myself in him. Just as Gabe had been waiting for me to finish my Providence days, I was now waiting for him to finish days that belonged to a world I could visit but could not inhabit. A week after I returned home, Gabe called me from his next location. We talked about ordinary things for a while. Then he became quiet. "I think we are very good at missing each other," he said. "What does that mean?" "It means every time I come back, I love you exactly as much as when I left." He paused. "But I spend half the first night learning your life again." I sat down at my kitchen table. There was nothing cruel in what he had said. That was why I could answer honestly. "And when I come to you, I spend the first day figuring out where I fit." Gabe exhaled softly. "Yeah." Neither of us spoke for several seconds. We finally had language for the thing distance itself had hidden from us. We could keep loving each other across hundreds or thousands of miles. We had proved that. What we could not seem to create was enough ordinary life in the same place for either of us to feel that we were building one together. I knew Gabe's voice better than anyone's. I knew how he took his coffee, how he packed his equipment, and what his face looked like when he heard something worth recording. But I no longer knew most of the people who filled his days. Gabe knew when I was worried before I admitted it, knew which shoulder hurt after too many hours at my workbench, and knew exactly how to make me laugh when I was exhausted. But he no longer knew much about the people, problems, and ordinary moments that made up my days. We had become experts at returning to each other without noticing how much life was happening in between. A few days later, Gabe told me he would be back in Providence before his next assignment. For the first time, I was not wondering whether he would come home. I was wondering what coming home still meant. Gabe came to the workshop after closing on the evening before his next assignment. I was still at my work table, fitting the final pieces into a stained glass panel, its once broken sections now coming together beneath my hands. He set his equipment bag near the door, but did not take off his faded olive field jacket. I put down my tools. "You are packed." "Yes." He walked closer to the panel and studied it. You finished it. Almost. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then Gabe looked at me. If nothing changed, could you live like this for another 5 years? I knew exactly what he meant. 5 more years of airports and homecomings. 5 more years of telling each other about people the other man barely knew. 5 more years of squeezing the most important relationship in our lives into the spaces between 2 lives being built somewhere else. I could imagine doing it. That was different from wanting it. I could, I said. Gabe waited. But I do not think I want to. His eyes lowered for a moment. I stepped closer. Could you? Gabe looked around the workshop before answering. I could keep coming back forever. He looked at me again. But every time I come back, I feel a little more like I am visiting your life. The words hurt because they matched something I had been afraid to say. That is how I feel when I come to yours. Gabe nodded. I know. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Hearing the same truth from both directions made it impossible to keep treating it like a problem one more schedule might solve. There was no relief in recognizing it together, but there was clarity. We had spent months proving that distance could not make us stop loving each other. What we had not understood was that loving each other and sharing a life were not automatically the same thing. Gabe knew my heart. I knew his. But increasingly, the ordinary hours that made up our lives belonged to worlds the other person only visited. We could keep doing this, I said. I know. We might even be good at it. Gabe gave a small, sad smile. We already are. That was the hardest part. We had learned how to survive every departure and make every reunion feel like proof that the relationship still worked. But I finally understood what those reunions had been hiding. We were still calling each other partners while becoming visitors in each other's lives. I knew the man Gabe was, but more and more, I only knew the life he lived through the stories he brought home. He loved me, but more and more, he knew my days through the stories I saved for his return. I do not want to lose you, I said. Neither do I. His voice dropped. But I do not want to spend years being the man who visits your life for a few days, leaves again, and still calls himself your partner. I looked at him, and there was nothing I could say to make that untrue. And I do not want to keep arriving in yours like a guest who happens to be the person you love most. Gabe looked down for a moment. That is what scares me. Me too. The words hurt more than anything we had said that night because they finally named what neither of us had wanted to admit. We were not ending because the miles were too difficult. We were ending because we did not want love to become a collection of brief visits to each other's lives. I wanted to know Gabe's ordinary Tuesdays. Not only the stories he told me about them afterward. I wanted him beside me for the forgettable parts of my life. Not only the days important enough to save for his return. And neither of us could honestly promise that future without asking the other to become someone he did not want to be. Gabe stepped closer. So what are we doing? I looked at the man I still loved. I think we are refusing to spend the next 5 years becoming strangers to each other's lives while still calling ourselves the loves of each other's lives. Gabe closed his eyes for a second, then reached for me. I went into his arms before I could think about what it would feel like to lose them. We held each other without bargaining for another solution, because for the first time there was nothing left to misunderstand. I was not asking him to stay. He was not asking me to follow. We were simply holding the person we loved while accepting that love had not given us a life we could truly live together. When we finally pulled apart, Gabe touched my face. His thumb rested against my cheek for a moment, as if he were trying to memorize something no recorder could preserve. Then he kissed me. I kissed him back. There was nothing uncertain in it. It was the same love, the same tenderness, the same man I still wanted. That was what made it hurt. The kiss did not fail because our love had disappeared. It ended because eventually one of us had to let go. When our lips parted, neither of us moved away immediately. I rested my forehead against his and understood that this would be the last time neither of us was visiting. For these few seconds, we were simply together. Then Gabe whispered, I love you. I love you too. And this time, those words were not a reason to stay. They were the reason we could finally tell each other the truth. Gabe turned toward the stained glass panel once more. Light from the workbench passed through the newly joined pieces. You fixed it, he said softly. I remembered what I had told him the first week we met. That broken was not the same as worthless. The words would not come now. Gabe picked up his bag. At the door, he looked back at me. I love you, Nate. I love you too. Then he left. I heard the door close. And for the first time since Gabe Sullivan had walked into that workshop with a recorder in his hand, I did not follow the sound. The first few weeks after Gabe left were easier during the day than I expected and harder at night than I wanted to admit. The workshop gave me somewhere to put my attention. The ownership transition became official, new restoration projects arrived, and for the first time I was responsible for decisions my mentor had once made for me. I hired a young apprentice, learned that paperwork could consume an astonishing amount of time, and discovered that I genuinely liked being the person clients trusted with things they believed could not be saved. None of that felt like a consolation prize. That mattered. The cruelest part was how little my calendar changed. Gabe had already been gone for long stretches before we separated. I still woke up alone on many of the same mornings, went to the same workshop, worked through the same afternoons, and came home to the same apartment at night. Before the breakup, though, every absence had contained a return. There had always been a date to circle, a flight to track, an equipment bag appearing beside my door, Gabe's voice saying my name from the next room. Now the empty days were not leading toward anything. Losing Gabe did not change the shape of most of my weeks. It changed what I believed was waiting at the end of them. I had stayed in Providence because this was the life I wanted, and losing Gabe did not make that choice false. There were mornings when I unlocked the workshop and felt completely certain I belonged there. There were afternoons when I laughed with someone and realized several hours had passed without Gabe crossing my mind. Then I would go home, reach automatically for the cabinet where Gabe used to keep his favorite coffee mug, and remember that choosing correctly did not mean choosing without loss. Gabe and I did not try to turn our breakup into a different kind of relationship. At first, there were a few messages. He told me when he arrived safely. I sent him a photograph when the stained glass panel he had seen unfinished was finally installed. He replied that it looked beautiful. Neither of us used those exchanges to reopen the decision we had made. Gradually, the messages became less frequent. There was no argument, no dramatic final conversation, no moment when one of us blocked the other. We simply stopped visiting the edges of each other's daily lives. In some ways, I wished Gabe had given me something ugly to remember. Anger would have been easier to carry than affection with nowhere to go. Instead, I had home. The folder remained on my phone, filled with recordings Gabe had made during our time together. I avoided it for weeks. Then one night, I listened to home_01 again. After that, listening became a habit I did not like admitting even to myself. On the loneliest nights, I would put on my headphones and return to sounds that no longer belonged to my present. Rain against an old window, dinner cooking, the workshop before I owned it, our voices moving casually through rooms as if neither of us could imagine those moments becoming memories. I knew what I was doing. I was using those recordings to visit a life I had already chosen to leave behind. About 10 months after Gabe left, I had built a life that looked steady again. I was functioning. More than functioning, sometimes. I was building something good. But part of me still believed healing would be complete only when those recordings stopped matching. Then one night, while scrolling through the folder, I noticed the only file I had never played all the way through. Home_02. The file date showed Gabe had put it together several days before our last night in the workshop. Because of the date, I had convinced myself there might be something in it from those final days that I was not ready to hear. That assumption had become an excuse. I sat on the edge of my bed with the phone in my hand and realized I was tired of being afraid of a sound file. Whatever was inside it had already happened. It could not change the decision we had made. It could only change what I understood about the life behind us. I put on my headphones, opened home_02, and pressed play. Home_02 began with the workshop. I heard the ventilation fan, the faint movement of traffic outside, and then the familiar scrape of a glass cutter across a work table. A few seconds later, my own voice came through the headphones. Gabe had started home_02 with part of our original documentary interview. Why repair something when replacing it would be easier? He had asked me. My younger voice answered, because broken is not the same as worthless. I closed my eyes. The recording moved through fragments from the years that followed. Rain against my apartment window, dishes in the kitchen, my laughter from another room, Gabe telling me to hold still while he tested a microphone, and the two of us talking about absolutely nothing important. I understood then that home_02 was not the farewell message I had imagined. Most of what I was hearing came from long before our final night together. Near the end, the sound stopped. There was several seconds of room tone, followed by Gabe's voice. He sounded distracted, as though he had forgotten the recorder was still running. Nate thinks I record places. A pause. I do not think that is true anymore. I stopped breathing for a moment. Gabe continued, quieter now. I think I record the things I am afraid I will forget. Another pause. Then he said, and if I ever leave Providence, I hope he knows he was the first place that ever felt like home to me. The recording ended. I sat there with the headphones on long after the room had gone silent. For nearly a year, I had treated memory like an enemy I needed to defeat. I had imagined some future version of myself who could hear Gabe's name without feeling anything, as if indifference would prove that I had finally healed. But hearing his voice made me understand something I had confused for a long time. I really had been home to Gabe. He had not spent those years secretly longing for somewhere else because I was not enough. And Providence had not failed to become home because he did not love me enough. A person could feel like home and still live inside a life that could not be shared every day. That was the contradiction we had spent months trying to solve. Gabe and I had never struggled to return to each other. We had struggled with everything that happened after one of us arrived and before one of us left again. Home_02 did not change that truth. It did not make our breakup a mistake, and it did not give me a reason to contact him and reopen a decision we had made with clear eyes. It gave me something quieter. Gabe had not left because what we had meant too little. He had preserved it because it meant enough to be afraid of forgetting. The next morning, I copied the home folder onto a backup drive. I renamed it Gabe, Keep, and stored it with the personal things I wanted to preserve. Then I removed the folder from my phone. I did not delete Gabe from my life. I stopped carrying our past in my pocket every hour of the day, waiting for loneliness to tempt me back into it. When I arrived at the workshop, morning light was passing through a restored panel near the front windows and laying pieces of color across the floor. My apprentice was examining another panel with a narrow crack running through one section. Should we replace it? He asked. I walked over and studied the glass. For a moment, I remembered Gabe standing in almost the same place, holding his recorder, listening to sounds I had never thought were worth keeping. I smiled. No, I said, let us see what we can save. Maybe some relationships do not end because love becomes weaker. Sometimes two people can still know each other's hearts while slowly becoming strangers to the ordinary lives happening around them. Distance itself may not be what separates them. The harder question is whether the moments between goodbyes and homecomings still add up to a life they are truly sharing. For a long time, I thought losing Gabe meant something between us had failed. Now I think some loves can be completely real and still reach a place where holding on would mean living mostly in anticipation of the next reunion. Perhaps moving forward is not about forgetting someone who once felt like home. Maybe it is about accepting that a person can remain precious to us even when we can no longer build our everyday life beside them. What we had mattered. That is why letting it become a memory hurts so much. If you had been in our place, how long would you have kept fighting for a love that still felt real when your everyday lives no longer felt shared? And what would moving forward mean to you if the person you had to leave was still someone you loved?